September 14th, 1814, during the War of 1812, the Battle of Fort McHenry inspired Francis Scott Key to write what would later become our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. There's a lot of myths surrounding the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner, mostly because Francis Scott Key never kept a written first-hand account of his writing of it. Now, one of the primary myths surrounding it is that it was a poem and it was only later set to music, that he never intended it to be a song. The truth is that Francis Scott Key was an accomplished lyricist, writing 3 songs and 10 hymns in his career. And he had actually already written a previous song set to the same tune, which was called When the Warrior Returns. So, yeah, and the evidence that these songs were both written to the same tune actually comes from a unique rhyme scheme in both songs, which matches the original song called the Anacreontic Song, which was actually the anthem of an amateur musicians club from London, England in the late 19th century, so the late 1800s, an amateur musicians club. It was a song meant to showcase a solo singer or a 4-part harmony of singers' talents. It was supposed to be a pretty difficult song to sing. And so it's a unique song structure. It has 8 line stanzas instead of the typical 4, with 9 rhymes. So the end of each line rhymes, and there's an additional rhyme in the 5th line, which is where you hear the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air. That's that extra rhyme, which is really the clear indicator that this song was set to the Anacreontic Song, which was popular in what was called at the time broadside ballads. So that was for the purpose of disseminating music easier. It was easier to just print the words instead of a staff of music. Printing that in a newspaper would get pretty costly and just really impossible. So setting your lyrics to an already existing tune people know was an easier way to get it spread around. And so over 80 broadside ballads had already been written to the Anacreontic Song in the early 1800s. And yeah, so that's pretty compelling evidence that, even Key's own brother-in-law, who claimed to be one of the people to set that tune to music, were not being truthful about that. Another big myth surrounding the writing of the song is that Francis Scott Key was a captive of the British, in the sense that he was writing the song from a jail cell, scrawling it onto an envelope or something like that. The truth is that Francis Scott Key was actually with the British because he was on a diplomatic mission to free an elderly citizen who had been captured by the British. And he was successful in his diplomatic mission, him and another lawyer, in part because he actually had a loyalist uncle, and so he kind of had interests on both sides. He was able to negotiate with the British effectively. But unbeknownst to them, when they set out on this mission, the British had been planning an attack on Baltimore, the Battle of Fort McHenry. And so, when they went to leave, they had to keep them under guard and keep them there until the battle was over, so that they couldn't go back with any secrets they may have overheard of British plans for the war. So they weren't really captives, as in prisoners. Everything was very cordial. They were aboard their own ship. He had all of his writing utensils and paper for writing up the documents to negotiate the release that they would have been signing. So it definitely wasn't the kind of situation where he was in a jail cell, scrawling it down with whatever he could find, because he was just so moved he had to get it written. He was probably just bored on his cruise ship, and they just couldn't leave yet. So, that's one of those myths that can be dispelled just with a little bit of logic. And so in 1931, an act of Congress made this song the official anthem of the United States, but there had already been kind of a de facto national anthem before the song was even written. So before Congress ever said anything about it, people kind of looked to have a unifying song, which before the Star-Spangled Banner was Hail Columbia. But the Star-Spangled Banner became very popular very quickly and overtook that, especially with the series of wars that followed the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the American Civil War, and the Spanish-American War. Throughout those wars, the banner was really cemented as being synonymous with the flag and fighting for freedom. And by World War I, it was already the official national anthem for the U.S. Navy and Army, again, before Congress ever wrote it into law that it was the national anthem. So it had gained a lot of traction and was pretty much the de facto national anthem before Congress ever moved to make the song the national anthem. And so some other appearances of the song in popular culture, and something I like to touch on because I'm a guitar player, was during the civil rights movements of the 60s. We saw the Star Spangled Banner kind of used as kind of counter-political, so to say, kind of a critique of the war efforts at the time of the United States in the controversial Vietnam War. Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock, and then later a lot of times in his career, but I think the first time was at Woodstock, he performed the Star Spangled Banner melody interwoven into a lot of guitar sound effects, such as, the sound of a rocket or a bomb going off imitated with a guitar and effects pedals. And it was to great effect. It was a strong political statement at the time, and I think besides obviously hearing it sung at sporting games and stuff, I think it's another common place people know the song from, and a nice resource to kind of see how, that political meaning of the song can be applied to a broader sense than just, what we think of when we hear it at a sporting event, and what it means to people. And so, yeah, in this video, I'd like to give you my own interpretation on guitar of the Star Spangled Banner. It probably won't be as good as Jimi Hendrix, but I hope you'll enjoy it.